Hey Reddit, I'm sitting in a Motel 6 right now, staring at a cardboard box that contains 30 years of my life, and I honestly can't decide if I want to scream or laugh. My sister Lisa and her husband Tom just stole everything. And when I say everything, I don't mean they took my favorite watch or some inheritance money. They took the air out of my lungs. They took Legacy Builders, the construction firm my father spent 40 years building from a single pickup truck into a multi-million-dollar empire. They took the Victorian estate that's been in our family for 4 generations. And then, they had the local sheriff escort me off the property because I was trespassing on their private land. To understand how we got here, you have to understand my dad. He's a giant of a man, or at least he was. He's the kind of guy who can tell if a wall is an eighth of an inch off just by glancing at it. But over the last 2 years, the light in his eyes started to flicker. It started with him forgetting where he put his keys, then it was forgetting the names of long-term clients. And eventually, he started forgetting that I was the one who had been running the day-to-day operations of the company for the last decade while Lisa was off finding herself in various expensive retreats across Europe. Tom, her husband, is a different kind of snake. He's all veneers and expensive suits, the kind of guy who looks like he's perpetually waiting for a camera crew to interview him about his grind set. 6 months ago, Lisa and Tom moved back into the main house under the guise of helping with Dad's care. I was relieved at first. I was pulling 80-hour weeks keeping the business afloat and trying to manage Dad's doctor appointments. I trusted them. That was my first mistake. My second mistake was thinking that blood was thicker than a balance sheet. While I was on site at our biggest project, a luxury condo development downtown, Lisa and Tom were whispering in Dad's ear. They convinced him that I was trying to sell the company behind his back. They told him I was planning to put him in a budget nursing home the moment he became too much of a burden. They used his fear of losing control to strip him of it entirely. The execution happened 3 days ago. I came home from work, covered in drywall dust and exhausted, only to find the locks changed. Tom met me at the front gate, looking like he'd just stepped out of a catalog for pretentious villains. He handed me a folder. Inside were copies of legal documents, power of attorney, a full transfer of the business assets to a new entity controlled by him and Lisa, and a deed transfer for the house. My father's signature was at the bottom. It was shaky, barely legible, but it was his. Dad wouldn't do this, I told him, my voice cracking. Tom just smirked, that oily, self-satisfied look that makes you want to check if you still have your wallet. He did what was necessary to protect his legacy from someone who clearly doesn't value it. Ethan, you're fired, by the way, effective immediately. We've already notified the bank and the job sites. Don't bother coming to the office. Your personal effects will be mailed to a P.O. box. I tried to push past him to see my father, but 2 private security guards I'd never seen before stepped out from behind the hedges. They didn't say a word, just loomed. I realized then that this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a hostile takeover of a family. Lisa wouldn't even come out to look me in the eye. She stayed behind the tinted glass of the upstairs window, watching her brother get thrown out like a bag of trash. I spent the first night in my truck, parked in a grocery store lot numb. I've spent my entire adult life building that company. I know every subcontractor, every vendor, every line of code in our bidding software. I lived and breathed Legacy Builders. Now I have exactly $4,000 in my personal savings and a box of old tax returns and hard drives I'd brought home to work on a few weeks prior. That box, that's where the story actually starts. See, Tom is a big picture guy, which is corporate speak for I'm too lazy to check the details. He assumed that by locking me out of the office servers, he'd cut me off from the company's history, but I'm a bit of a paranoid hoarder when it comes to data. I've always kept physical backups of our major contracts and financial audits in my home office. When they kicked me out, they let me grab one box of personal papers from my desk. They didn't realize that box contained the encrypted drive with the last 5 years of shadow ledgers. I'd been keeping to track some weird discrepancies I'd noticed since Tom started consulting for Dad. I opened my laptop in this depressing motel room an hour ago and I started digging. I didn't find just a few missing dollars. I found a goddamn canyon. It turns out Tom and Lisa haven't just been planning to take the company. They've been using it as a laundry mat for the last 18 months. They've been funneling money through a series of shell companies, ostensibly for marketing and site procurement, but the money is disappearing into offshore accounts. And the kicker, they've been flagging these payments as tax-deductible business expenses. It's a massive, blatant tax evasion scheme tied directly to the new legal entity they just forced my father to sign over. They think they won. They think they're sitting in that big house drinking my father's expensive scotch, celebrating their legacy. But they didn't just inherit a business. They just inherited a ticking time bomb, and I'm the one with my finger on the detonator. They wanted to erase me from the family? Fine. But I'm going to make sure that when the dust settles, there isn't a single brick left of the legacy they tried to steal. Update: it's been 3 weeks since I was escorted off the property, and the silence from their end is deafening. I haven't tried to call Lisa. I haven't tried to reason with Tom. I know exactly how they operate. They're waiting for me to crawl back, begging for a severance package or a job as a site foreman. They want to see me broken because it validates their alpha fantasy. Instead, I've been living in a small studio apartment, surviving on caffeine and pure, unadulterated spite. I've spent the last 21 days doing a deep dive into the L&T Holdings files. It's even worse than I thought. Tom didn't just embezzle, he was incredibly sloppy about it. He used the company credit lines to fund a lifestyle that Lisa has been flaunting on Instagram: new cars, charity galas, and a complete remodel of the west wing of our family home. The irony is that the remodel is being done by a crew that usually works for our competitors. I guess Tom didn't want the legacy, guys asking why the boss's son-in-law was paying for Italian marble with site contingency funds. My first move wasn't to go to the police. If I go to the cops or the IRS now, the company gets seized, the assets get frozen, and my father, who technically still has his name on some of these documents, could end up in a legal nightmare he's not mentally equipped to handle. No, I need to isolate the rot. I need to make sure Lisa and Tom are the only ones left holding the bag when the ceiling collapses. I started by reaching out to Liam, our primary contact at the bank. Liam and I played high school football together, and he knows I'm the one who actually knows how to read a P&L statement. I didn't tell him about the fraud yet. I just casually mentioned that I was no longer with the company and that he should probably double-check the personal guarantees on the new construction loans Tom was trying to pull. "Wait, Ethan," Liam said over the phone, his voice dropping an octave. "Tom told us you were taking a sabbatical for mental health reasons. He said you authorized the new signature cards." "I haven't authorized a thing, Liam. And if my name is on a signature card dated after the 14th, you might want to run a handwriting analysis on it. Just a friendly tip between buddies. I'd hate for the bank to be complicit in mortgage fraud." The panic in Liam's breath was like music to my ears. Within 4 hours, Legacy Builders' primary line of credit was temporarily suspended for administrative review. This is the construction industry. Cash flow is everything. Without that credit line, Tom can't pay the subcontractors for the downtown condo project. And those guys, they don't work for free. Next, I turned my attention to their reputation. In our city, Legacy Builders means something because of my dad's word. People trust the name. But Tom wants to be a developer now, not a builder. He's been cutting corners on the current projects to pad his and Lisa's pockets. I know this because I have the original engineering specs for the foundation of the new medical plaza we were supposed to start next month. I accidentally leaked the revised, cost-optimized specs Tom drafted to the city building inspector, Sarah. Sarah is a no-nonsense woman who once failed one of our jobs because a handrail was 2 inches too short. I didn't send them from my email, obviously. I used an encrypted anonymous drop. I included a note: "Check the steel grade on the southeast pylons. L&T Holdings is trying to save $200K at the expense of structural integrity." I spent yesterday afternoon sitting in my truck across the street from the job site. At 2:00 p.m., 3 city vehicles pulled up. Sarah stepped out with a clipboard and a look on her face that usually precedes a very expensive stop work order. 10 minutes later, I saw Tom sprinting out of the site trailer, his expensive suit jacket flapping in the wind, waving his arms like a panicked Muppet. He was screaming at her, which is the absolute worst thing you can do to Sarah. She didn't even look at him, she just slapped a bright orange sticker on the main gate. While the city shuts down their projects, I've been working on the credit erasure. Tom has always been obsessed with his credit score. He brags about his black card status like it's a personality trait. But Tom has a weakness. He's a gambler, not at casinos but in high-risk emerging tech stocks. He's been using L&T Holdings assets as collateral for personal margin loans. I found the accounts. He used a password that was a variation of his wedding anniversary. Lisa really picked a winner. I'm not stealing his money. That would be illegal. I'm simply highlighting the risk. I sent a very detailed anonymous tip to the compliance department of his brokerage, pointing out that the collateral he provided, the family construction company, is currently under a municipal stop work order and is facing a massive credit freeze from its primary lender. I watched his net worth evaporate in real time as the brokerage issued a margin call. If he can't cover it, which he can't because I just froze his business credit, they'll start liquidating his positions. My sister called me tonight. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail, her voice high and tight, sounding more like the spoiled teenager she used to be than the CFO she claims to be now. "Ethan, pick up the phone. I don't know what you're doing, but Dad is asking for you and the houses. Things are getting complicated. Just call me." You don't get to use Dad as a shield now, Lisa. You had your chance to be a family. Now you're just a line item on a balance sheet I'm about to zero out. Update: the pressure is starting to cook them, and it's a beautiful thing to witness from the shadows. I've moved from my motel to a slightly better short-term rental, mostly because I needed a more reliable internet connection to manage the dissolution of Tom's ego. The stop work order on the medical plaza was just the beginning. Since the primary credit line at the bank is still under review, Tom hasn't been able to pay the heavy equipment rentals. Yesterday, the repo crews showed up and hauled away 2 excavators and a crane. You haven't lived until you've seen a guy in a $5,000 suit try to physically block a tow truck while the neighbors film it for TikTok. Tom is officially a local meme. They're calling him Tantrum Tom. But here where the legacy erasure gets personal. Lisa and Tom have been living in the family estate like they're the king and queen of the suburbs. They've been hosting these networking mixers to try and attract new investors to replace the bank credit they lost. They're trying to pivot to sell the company's remaining assets to a group of predatory developers. I can't let that happen. That business belongs to my father and by extension the people who actually built it. I contacted Sophia. Sophia was our dad's personal assistant for 20 years before Lisa fired her the day they took over. Sophia knows where all the metaphorical bodies are buried, and more importantly, she loves my dad like a second father. She was devastated when they forced him into that private care wing of the house, which is basically just a glorified bedroom where they keep him sedated and out of the way. Sophia, I said when we met at a quiet diner on the edge of town, I need to get Dad out of there, but more than that, I need him to see what they've done. Sophia wiped her eyes. They won't let anyone in, Ethan. They hired a private nurse who is basically a bouncer. They're terrified he'll have a moment of clarity and realize he signed his life away. He doesn't need to leave the house to see the truth, I told her. He just needs to see the mail. See, Tom and Lisa have been intercepting the mail for months. They've been hiding the delinquency notices, the tax liens, and the letters from the labor board regarding unpaid wages. I've been collecting copies of all of it through my backdoor access to the digital billing systems. I put together a legacy report, a leather-bound folder that looks exactly like the ones we used to present to high-end clients. Inside, however, was the autopsy of the company. It showed the $2.4 million deficit, the fraud, the repo orders, and the photos of the stop work signs. I didn't send it through the mail. I waited for their grand gala last Friday night. They invited the town's elite, trying to put on a front of prosperity. I knew the caterers. I'd worked on the owner's house 3 years ago. A quick conversation and a small consulting fee got me a server's jacket and a way into the kitchen. I didn't want to cause a scene. I wanted to be a ghost. While the important people were sipping champagne in the ballroom, I slipped upstairs. The private nurse was in the hallway, buried in her phone. I recognized her. She wasn't a nurse. She was a medical assistant from a cut-rate agency Tom has a stake in. I told her there was an issue with the catering bill downstairs that required her immediate attention. She didn't even hesitate. I walked into my father's room. It smelled like lavender and stale air. He was sitting in his armchair, staring out the window at the garden he used to spend every weekend weeding. He looked smaller than I remembered. "Hey, Pops," I whispered. He turned, his eyes unfocused for a second before they locked onto mine. "Ethan, you're late for the site walk. The concrete's coming at 7:00 a.m. My heart broke right then and there. He was living in a loop of the past. I knelt beside him and opened the leather folder. I didn't overwhelm him. I just showed him one thing, a photo of the Victorian house with a foreclosure pending, notice I'd managed to get the bank to issue based on the missed payments Tom had been hiding. Lisa and Tom didn't take care of the house, Pop. They lost it, and they're losing the company. The clarity hit him like a cold snap. He didn't cry, he didn't scream. His jaw just set in that way I'd seen 1,000 times when a contractor tried to screw him over. They lied, didn't they, about you? They did, but I'm fixing it. I need you to sign one more thing, not for them, for the legacy. It was a rescission of the power of attorney, drafted by a lawyer I'd spent my last $2,000 on. It was a document stating that the previous transfer was made under duress and cognitive impairment. With Sophia as a witness who had slipped in behind me, he signed it. I left the house before anyone knew I was there. 2 hours later, as the gala was reaching its peak, the legacy report folders I'd prepared for the investors were accidentally distributed instead of the promotional brochures. I stood in the shadows of the oak trees across the street and watched as the lights in the ballroom started to flicker, not literally, but the vibe shifted instantly. People started leaving, not just leaving but scurrying. By midnight, the gala was a graveyard of half-eaten shrimp and abandoned dreams. Lisa's scream from the front porch was loud enough to wake the neighbors. She'd finally opened her copy of the report. Update: the final act didn't happen in a courtroom, though there will be plenty of that in the coming months. It happened on the front lawn of the family estate this morning. The IRS moves slow, but when they move, they have the grace of a steamroller. Once I turned over the shadow ledgers and the evidence of the shell companies, it was game over. Because I had the rescission signed by my father and witnessed by Sophia before the IRS officially opened their investigation, I was able to shield the original legacy builders' assets by arguing they were stolen through elder abuse. This morning, the federal agents arrived. I was there too, sitting in my truck at the curb. I watched as Tom was led out in handcuffs. He wasn't wearing his suit today, he was in a bathrobe, looking pale and bloated. He tried to tell the agents he was Ethan's partner, but the lead agent just laughed. They have a paper trail that leads directly to Tom's personal accounts. Lisa wasn't arrested yet, but she's broke. Every account tied to L&T Holdings has been seized, the cars are gone. The renovations on the house have been halted, leaving the West Wing a skeleton of exposed studs and dust, a fitting metaphor for what they did to our family. She saw me as the agents were loading Tom into the back of a black SUV. She ran toward my truck, her face a mask of fury and desperation. "You did this, you ruined us. We're family, Ethan. How could you do this to your own sister?" I rolled down the window just an inch. "Family doesn't change the locks, Lisa. Family doesn't sedate their father to steal his life's work. You didn't want a brother, you wanted an obstacle. I'm just the guy who cleared the site." "We have nowhere to go," she sobbed. "The bank is taking the house." "Actually," I said, leaning back, "the bank sold the debt to a private equity group yesterday. I'm the majority shareholder of that group thanks to some investors who still believe in the legacy name. You have exactly 1 hour to get your things. And Lisa, don't touch the furniture, it's part of the estate." The look on her face was worth every cent of the $4,000 I started with. It was the look of someone who finally realized that they weren't the smartest person in the room, they were just the loudest. I walked into the house 10 minutes later. The silence was heavy, but it wasn't the oppressive silence of the last few months. It felt like the house was finally breathing again. I went upstairs to my father's room. He was sitting in the same chair, but the lavender smell was gone, replaced by the scent of fresh pine. Sophia had already started cleaning. "Is it done?" he asked. His voice was stronger today. "We started him on new medication, away from the private nurse's cocktail of sedatives." "It's done, Pop. The company is back in your name. I'm the CEO officially, but you're the chairman. We have a lot of work to do. The downtown project is a mess, and we need to rebuild the crew." He looked at me, and for the first time in years, he smiled. It was a small, tired smile, but it was real. "I always knew you were a better builder than me, Ethan. You know how to handle the foundations." I'm staying in the house now. Lisa is living in a studio apartment across town, working a retail job she hates. Tom is facing 10 to 15 years for tax evasion and wire fraud. He's currently trying to flip on his business associates to get a lighter sentence, but since he was the one who signed all the documents, he's finding it hard to shift the blame. People ask me if I feel bad about ruining my sister's life. I tell them the same thing I tell our new apprentices on their first day: if you build something on a crooked foundation, it's going to fall down eventually. I didn't knock their house down, I just stopped holding up the walls. The legacy isn't the bricks or the bank account. It's the fact that when things get tough, you don't sell out the people who stood by you. I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure this name means something again. And as for Tom and Lisa, well, I hear the coffee in federal prison is almost as bad as the stuff at Motel 6. Enjoy the view from the bottom, guys. I hear it's a long way up.